Welcome back, you filthy exiles. And I went away for the last 2 days. May have done a little bit of partying. And anyway, in between that, I managed to get my Black Flame. Well, we've converted our Tempest Shield build to Black Flame. So a few developments have occurred since the last video, which was out like a day ago. So there is a new POB. Now, I'll talk about this in brief, but we'll talk about this next because there'll be a few probably naysayers in the comments who'll be like, that's not real or right. Anyway, we're going to do like a POB for those guys. And for everybody else, we'll just like leave the POB as is. Anyway, so basically getting into the build concept here. So essentially we're throttling up Tempest Shield. We now have it at level 21. We are using some pretty expensive stuff in this. So we're probably like easily like 50, 60 div down, probably a little bit more than that, maybe 70 div at this point. Yeah, something like that. And basically where we're at is we got rid of the Skin of the Lords because it just, it defensively not enough armor at the end of the day, and the mitigation that you get from Incandescent Heart is just way too good. We did drop our ES pool down a little bit as well, and I'll explain to the reasoning behind that. But basically, yeah, we've switched out the helm. We've got a new wand, which doesn't have too bad of damage. We could get better damage, but it's not too bad. Still Aegis Aurora. We've switched to Polaric. Well, we've had Polaric Devastation in it previously, but we've actually switched to Black Flame. And the reason why we're using Black Flame is this converts your ignites into Chaos Ignites. So you still, for all intensive purposes, scale Chaos damage, or sorry, scale fire ignite dot, and for example, fire damage over time. But instead, you're going to convert that to chaos dot, which also the big advantage here is when you inflict wither, it does not deplete off or run out on enemies. So the way that we then proc wither is we use totems. So we have wither totems, and in this case, we have a 4-socketed setup for wither totems. And then basically we use faster castings to get 15 stacks of wither up. Now people will be like, you're not going to get to 15 stacks on absolutely everything. True. When you're running around in Delve, you're probably not going to do that. And if your totems die before they've procced enough stacks, yeah, they're probably not going to do that. But on bosses, you're going to get 15 stacks, right? That's a no-brainer. This build, again, not made for bosses. This is made for simply hoovering up currency from Delve at the end of the day. Defensively, we're pretty much running around at 600 depth delve without any major issues or anything like that. Idle 890 ES regeneration per second, then it throttles up to like 2,500 with the Aegis Aurora pinging up. Could we get a better amulet? Yeah, we could. Could we get better helm? Yes, we could. I did switch out of Crown of the Inward Eye, and the reason why, you could still use it, but the big reason why is the implicit that you get on this helm here. So originally we were using, there it is, Crown of the Inward Eye, which arguably did give me a lot of ES, right? But the big advantage just using a normal crown is, number one, we do use Despair Curse, and number two, 6% of physical damage taken from hits as chaos damage means that you're immune to 6% of that damage. A few other changes I made to the build were some people suggested running Chaos Bindings. I agree. We got the Determination implicit. This is like 1.5 div to 2 div. Perk walls, Toe doesn't really work with Dot. So, or that's as far as what I'm aware. So we're using Shape of Seed. So nearby allies gain 4% life regeneration per second, which throttles up our ES regeneration. And also a mana regeneration, which is an advantage. And it also makes your Merc very, very tanky. We do have Despair and Enfeeble on our curse from our Merc. Now, in the POB, and we'll talk about this, there is a bit of a weird thing with POB because, like, it's not really made for having mercs where you have like infinite level curses that you can proc. So more or less, like, you could add in Enfeeble, will get you up to 2.8 mil effective hit pool if they've been inflicted with a Enfeeble, you get an extra 4.9 mil if they have Despair procced on them. And that's without low life on as well. So you get an extra, like, what, 3 mil there from low life. So this, I don't think this is actually hitting dot cap at all. But, like, POB is weirdly calculating that it is. Like, it's doing a lot of damage, more or less. We don't have we don't have too much reduction in the time that ignites are on enemies because we're not running a replica Amber Wake, and that wouldn't be possible with Black Flame anyway. But we are tearing enemies up, and it just doesn't look like 20 million ignite dot when you're sitting on enemies. But yeah, it definitely is inflicting huge amounts of damage at this stage. Now, a couple of other things I added to the build just for good measure. So obviously, I've played BLACKFLAME builds in the past, and you can't play a Chaos.BLACKFLAME build without running Unspeakable Gifts. And the reason why is 10% chance for enemies to explode, dealing a quarter of their maximum life as chaos damage. This is pretty damn effective, to be honest with you, and definitely ups the amount of clear that the build has, especially when mapping. I do have an error in the build here. I just don't have the heart to want to change it because we do use these nodes as well. And the way that we get around our reservation efficiency, so we can run our our malevolence as well. So we've got malevolence, discipline, and this fully cracked out 54% Tempest shield, right? Because Tempest shield's reservation goes up the more auras that you reserve. Is we're basically just using the reservation efficiency nodes, and then we have one with self-control, and then the rest we just spec up with dexterity, so we don't have to worry about dexterity. We also use it to res cap as well, with some extra mana reservation and just flat damage, things like that, which is all a big benefit. If you did come across and get Prismatic Heart, I don't think this would actually help the build anymore, and I think disorientating display isn't necessarily... Actually, no, that probably will still work, because if you scale fire damage up, it still scales with the Fire Ignite dot for some weird reason. BLACKFLAME is just a really, really weird item at the end of the day. Now, we do have a Watcher's Eye in this now, and we'll get to this. We do use the 20% damage over time multiplier with Malevolence, which just increases our amount of damage overall. So yeah, overall, I don't have any of the low life stuff ticked. Like, this would actually be like 50% of this metric, so 1.5 mil DPS, something like that, because it only occurs at 50% of the enemy life. And then basically, yeah, I'll leave it up to you guys to what you want to tick on. And then obviously we've got a merc set up here, but we'll talk about the tree, which gives us our determination. So we're getting a pretty high amount of EHP with this build. And again, this build is just made to collect Azurite at like 500 to 600 depth. If you had a Mage Blood on this build, it would be essentially God level, because of the amount of armor that you could stack up on it and the overcap resistances. And then we basically start to look at like fully overcap resistances and all that sort of jazz as well, which is pretty much where I'm going to take this build now, because I'm not doing another build until I get Mage Blood. So we're going to farm Mage Blood at this stage. We're going to use this to do that. Anyway, that's a basic like overview of the build. Let's get into all the gearing and all the rest of the stuff and talk about it all in a bit more detail. Okay, so let's talk POB config. So just talking through from the very top. Solar Brine King, Solar Tukahama. We have time spent stationary as 5. We have always have full energy shield unticked. It doesn't really do anything anyway. And then basically we have endurance charges. This is coming from our setup with our anoint from Inexorable. And then we have nothing else ticked. Focus you could have on. You get the 13.5 mil if you do have focused on. And then you have flask charges active, killed recently. And then Sigil of Power Stage 1. This just auto triggers, so no need to worry about being like, oh no, that's a distorting damage stat. And it doesn't really do anything major anyway if you do turn it up, so it does absolutely nothing. We do have a Lightning Golem, which slightly increases our damage, not by a lot. Hindered, we get from our Glove Implicit. Low Life would apply if we were running our Punishment, and this will throttle your DPS up, but it's actually 50% of the DPS, so it's actually closer to like 12.6, what's that, 13.1 million DPS, something like that. If you include that, which ticks over after 50% on enemies. Wither stacks comes from the totems. Now people will be like, oh, you're not going to have 15 stacks of Wither all the time. On bosses you will, and that's what we count this as, so get over it. We have enemies ignited, so yes, 100%. For some reason when they're ignited, they seem to have you have a higher effective hit pool, which is really weird. Enemies are shocked. You don't need to change the shock percentage in here, just increases damage. Like if it was like 45%, it'd go up higher. Just depends on how much shock. I'm just going to leave it as is. Again, people always like sit there and look at the shock figures on every single different type of enemy. So it's easier just to don't put a shock value in there and leave it as is. Enemies covered in ash. So this is coming from Polaric Devastation and Guardian and Pinnacle boss damage. There's nothing in here that's been changed at all. So yeah, that's basically it. The POB configs are pretty simple. Now, a couple of other things to bear in mind. This doesn't factor in the curses. So we do have a merc setup in here where I do have determination on, which is why mana is negative. If this was the case, you'll have 105 mana, but your EHP goes down. This is active all the time because your merc is near you. And the other thing to basically get our other curses into the build, I've had to just tack it onto 2 inactive gem sockets here, because if you try and put it here, it won't activate. The big issue with this is you can only have 1 curse active at a time conventionally without buffing that up, because it's your main character. It doesn't account for the Mercrite. So in this case, we would have Despair up, which is a huge buff, and this is coming from our Merc proccing Despair. It gets us to 15.8 mil. There's no discriminator there. That will be 15.8 mil. And then there's also Enfeeble, which would increase your EHP to 2.8 mil as well. But that then turns your Despair off because it reprioritizes. Now, there's an argument to say Ignite DPS is 1.8 mil because that's the DPS of the flat Ignite. But the total damage per Ignite, and you can only Ignite once on an enemy, is 11.6 mil. You can take with that whatever number you want. You can either look at this as a shit build because it only does 1.8 mil, or you can look at the total Ignite damage for the duration, which is 11.6 mil. I'll leave that up to you guys. I'll put the POB in the description for you, as it is at the end of the day. But yeah, that's it for the configs. And again, this build is made for just hoovering up Azurite at the end of the day. It's not a planet destroying build. It's just super tanky and runs through Delve pretty easily, and it's really easy on your hands. It's very similar to Cast When Stun. Anyway, let's get into the rest of the video. Okay, so for gearing on this one, obviously we've switched out a fair bit of gear to optimize this out, so let's talk through it. So first of all, the helm, I got a high regeneration helm, and you basically want to roll this 30% increased ailments while focused. You'll notice in the tree, I have not ticked this on. I've left it off. Actually, it was ticked on. There we go. It's now off. So basically, yeah, if you tick this on, the ailments will last for a bit longer on the Ignite, and so then it'll do more damage over the life of the Ignite for the duration that it's up. So it's a pretty effective node to have. You could also get +1 to the gems, and this would give you +1 to Malevolence and Discipline, which would increase your damage and your ES pool. So it's entirely up to you if you want to do that or the other route. I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. Our wand, we fixed this, so we had to pay another, well, net neutral of trade was like 1 div. I don't necessarily think fire damage is the right role here, but I'm not 100% sure. Though we could just chuck attributes on this at this stage. Your big things here are spell damage and lightning damage and damage over time. So we've got 3 of those things. This is not a perfect wand to have, but they've started to get very expensive the better you get. I need to experiment more with flat chaos damage as well. Then in the chest, we've just got an incandescent heart with a 1+ to level of socketed gems, which sort of gets halfway to what the previous chest piece was, except for the unwavering stance. But at the end of the day, this gets our Tempest shield up to level 31, and it also goes +1 to all of our awakened jewels, which we've now switched all to awakened jewels and everything else. We've still got Polaric Devastation in the build. We've still got Replica's Dragonfang's Flight in the build with Inexorable on it, because that's how we generate our endurance charges, and we get 50% increased armor when we're stationary. Then outside of that, we're obviously running a BLACKFLAME. This is one of my favorite rings of all time. And this has a 10% fire damage over time roll. You can get better rolls, and I probably should have crafted actually I was looking at increasing the use prismatic catalyst to get the quality up, but they're very expensive. I was like, nah, I'm too cheap to do that because I need a mage blood. And then basically I've got my Aegis Aurora, obviously my favorite shield. This is BIS. I did do the calculations between a 5% of energy shield, recovery shield, and this, but we're running around with nearly 50,000 armor. Once we get mage blood, even more. You get a lot more recovery on block from running Aegis than you do from a 5% ES regeneration shield on block. It's just nowhere near as good as the Aegis Aurora at the end of the day. I think it was like an increment of 1,000 ES regeneration versus 275 or something like that. So this was a much better deal, or 250 actually. So this was a much better deal. Then in our gloves, so we do not need exposure on this build because we're running Chaos and Chaos Dot, which is a Chaos Ignite. So we basically have Hinder, which actually increases our damage as well because it slows the enemy down and for some reason seems to exacerbate the Ignite effect from Dot, or the Dot effect from Ignite. And then obviously we have Ignite Prolif on this as well. And then beyond that, we've just got Regenerate, Life, Cold Res, Lightning Res, all the rest of the stuff. This isn't the best set of gloves that you could get. You could get way better gloves, but it's right now, it's doing the job. We did get a new belt, and this has high level of regeneration and a super high level of energy shield and just flat damage. So, and also resistances, so this helps us get to our resist cap. And then the boots, again, we've got ignites, you inflict deal, 6% faster damage. We could drop the 4% damage per endurance charge because this gives us 16% increased damage, and we could get sapped. Scorch and brittle don't work, as far as I know. So if you do go with another mod, then sapped would definitely be, or action speed would definitely be another mod, but I chose 4% increased damage per endurance charge. I haven't tested the others yet. Sapped is probably not a bad idea for defense. Then we're running Taste of Hate, which is a big defensive item in the build. We're running our Quartz Flask with life regeneration, and all these are gain charges on hit, by the way. We've got our Granite Flask with stun duration effect, so reduced by 50%. We've got increased armor on our Quicksilver Flask, and we also have block and stun recovery on our Basalt Flask. This is not the best Basalt Flask, by the way. Get a way better one, but we're just going to farm up to Mage Blood at this stage anyway and change all these out. But for gearing, yeah, these are all the changes that I made to get it to work the way that it's working. Okay, so for gem setups, we did make a fair few changes in the setup now. To get it to BLACKFLAME, we had to adjust a fair few things like the curses and things like that. So, in the Helm, Enlighten, we've got Discipline, we've got Flame Dash, and Malevolence. In the Wand, we've got Automation, we've got Phase Run, and we've got Molten Shield. If you didn't want to run Phase Run, you could just run Increased Duration on the Molten Shell, and that'll be perfectly fine. In the Shield, we've got Punishment, Sigil of Power, and Cast when damage taken. So Sigil of Power, even if it's level 1 and it'll do it consistently, is just a really good thing to have for a little bit of 10% damage reduction. And it just auto triggers now because it's on cast when damage taken. We keep this at level 12 and level 16, and the reason why is the mana cost and also the damage taken, so that procs a lot more too. Now in our chest piece, we're running a level 21 Tempest Shield. You don't need 20% quality for this. Those are extremely expensive. You don't need it for this. That doesn't increase damage or anything like that. We run Awaken Deadly Ailments, Cruelty, Support, Awaken Burning Damage, Empower. This is a level 4 Empower, and Awaken Unbound Ailments. Then in the gloves, we're running Chaos Golem, Flame Golem, Stone Golem, and Lightning Golem. And then finally, we run a totem setup with Spell Totem, Wither Totem, Fast Casting, and multiple totem support. So with our pathing tree, we actually made a fair few changes as well, including in the Ascendancy this time. So we start with the Witch's Ascendancy. We got rid of the nodes in here because I needed the extra points. We went up to Arcane Focus, Practical Application. We need Searing Heat for faster burn. Pardon me. And then Utmost Intelligence with the Strength allocated per Mastery as well. Then we have a Disorientating Display, Smoking Remains, and Prismatic Heart cluster jewel, which a lot of people gave me some jip about previously. The reason why I used the armor based one was because of armor. But anyway, and then we have Forbidden Flesh and Flame. We're running Void Beacon this time, and the reason why is enemies can no longer regenerate around this character, which is good because we're running Chaos Dot. And also on top of that, negative 20 Chaos resistance is very strong too. And then we got rid of the Whispers of Doom because we use our Merc to do a lot of our cursing. Then we have Chaos Inoculation, Influence, and 8% increased damage for your aura, your Herald auras. Then we come back across, we grab Golem Commander. We've got our Watcher's Eye up here, Mystic Bulwark, and Mana Reservation Efficiency. We then want to have Unnatural Calm. We want to get the increased duration of ailments on enemies, does a significant increase to damage. And then Acrimony. And now I have to take Might and Agility because my character struggles with attributes, but once we get a Mage Blood into this, that will no longer be an issue. That'll free up 2 points. And then Insightfulness, we run Elemental Overload, which I'm thinking on now as to whether or not that even has any credibility here. Yeah, it still does, which is really bizarre. But anyway, so then we scale up and we get Arcane Guarding with the blocked to attack damage. We do want to see if we can get Intimidate or something like that too, but this is something we'll have to play with. Then we come up and we get Unspeakable Gifts and Touch of Cruelty. Obviously, we've got another large cluster jewel here. And then we run our Circling Oblivion, Vile Reinvigoration, and then we run our Reservation efficiency cluster jewels as well, which gets our reservation down to enough that we can run Malevolence and be able to actually cast our spells and all that sort of stuff. Then we run Zealot's Oath into Holy Fire, into Sovereignty. When we level up again, we'll take the auras from skills, have 10% increased effect. Then we also want Faith and Steel with recover 5% of energy shield. We got another Thread of Hope here. So then we grab Divine Shield and Glancing Blows and an extra endurance charge because our Anoint is our inexorable, which means we get 4 endurance charges, which is pretty good, elemental damage reduction. We can't get rid of this node yet because we're deficient by 4 strength. So we need to find somewhere where we can get 4 strength somewhere else. Ideally, that's probably going to be in the cluster jewels, to be honest with you. And we're just going to have to see if we can craft one and get really lucky onto one of these to get another attribute roll. Probably on, maybe not on this one, but on this one or on this one. Fingers crossed, and then we can free up that 1 point. But yeah, that's basically it for the tree. Now, for the Ascendancy, because we're running Black Flame, we can no longer use Mastermind or Discord, which isn't a bad thing. So we're basically running Shaper of Flames, Shaper of Storms, Liege of the Primordial, and now we can get Bastion of Elements, which meant that we could fit Void Beacon in, which is a really good inclusion for a Chaos-based character. Now, I did have a look on the Occultist to see if this would actually work on the Occultist, and it just doesn't work the same. Shaper of Flames is just such a strong node for an Ignite build, and Elementalist has like a perfect setup with the Leisure of the Primordial and Bastion of Elements. And I just don't know how you could go past this at this stage. It's just too good of a kit on an Ascendancy to switch to another one just for the sake of it. But yeah, that's it for the pathing tree. Now, for the Merc setup, I was thinking about what I could better do with this. So you could get a Chaos Merc, and I'm going to consider doing that. But in the meantime, we're running one with Chaos Primacy, Blood Price, and then we have our like increased determination aura effect nodes for including on our rings and on Chaos Binding. We have gloves that do Despair and Enfeeble on hit, which is really useful. And then obviously we need an additional curse, so we will run Windscream to be able to do that. And then we switched our Perquil's Toe to a Shaper Seed, which just gives us increased regeneration. This build is totally designed around being lazy, so that's what this Ascendancy does. And also the Determination Aura we get for free from this too, which makes it super chonky. But that's it for our Merc setup. It's not like crazy or anything like that. Anyway, I thought this build would be a bit different. I have obviously been working some pretty cray hours of late, so I just wanted to play something where I could like no-brain my way around like 400 to 500 depth delve. I read an interesting comment yesterday about the builds I've been putting up aren't innovative because I used one thing where I used Doriani's negative lightning stacking. I'm like, I hope this is innovative enough. And obviously I am working on a Blade Trapper Greatsword build in the background as well. But now I need to get serious about getting a Mage Blood because I'm 3 builds deep, and yeah, a Mage Blood is needed to push them all above. And once I do that, I'll then do a video with showcasing Mage Blood on every one of the builds and how powerful they get with that. Because Mage Blood really is a build fixer item and fantastic. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to like and sub to the channel, the Twitch, and all the rest of the stuff. I'll probably be online later today as well. But until then, have a good one, and I'll see you guys later on.